So eventually you ended up out at the high school.
Oh yes, they discontinued that school, and I lacked. At that time, I lacked. I think I needed 6 hours to still get my major, and in English, and I got it that summer. As long as I was getting it to get to teach in the high school.
Didn't have.
Would
you come home for lunch, or was it too far?
No, we couldn't come home for lunch.
So you'd eat there?
We would stay there. Sometimes I stayed in my room because I would have a child that needed help.
Right.
And, I love my children now. And I tried to keep my room really attractive. And my one motto was, make learning delightful. And I mean learning. They learned. There was one boy, I just felt like I was not reaching at all. And his brother made A's, his sister made A's. One sister was a B student, but this one boy was a C. And I would not give extra points just because I liked a child.
Right.
I tried to hew to the line. And I felt kind of sorry for him, but he was well behaved and didn't cause any trouble, but he just couldn't seem to keep up with his siblings. And so one day I was subbing out at the high school, and the door flew open, and there was this man. And I knew who he was because his mother was with him. I knew his mother, and it was this boy that made C's. And he came running toward me. He grabbed me, he danced me around the room, and he had never touched me in his life before. He danced me around the room and hugging me and said, "Oh, Mrs. Hicks, I owe you so much. I owe you so much." And I said, "What do I owe you? You owe me?" He said, "You know, you changed my life." He said, "I now have 2 masters," and he was working on something else. "I am married. I have a little boy." He said, "Because of you, my whole life, my way of life has changed." I said, "I didn't know I did anything for you. I worried about you." And he said, "Oh, I learned so much." He said, "My sisters and my brother were so smart, and they were in the limelight all the time." He said, "I felt like I was a real dummy," but he wasn't. He just, for some reason, took a back seat to them, and thinking he was not their equal, and he had gone way beyond them.
Oh, see, I mean, that's amazing. Do you feel like that was your calling to be a teacher?
I couldn't have been anything else.
Yeah.
I loved.
And it came late in life. It came in.
Yeah, well,
not late, but midlife.
When I started when I was 19 during the war, and I taught. I'd never teach a whole year because when Frank's ship would come in, I was gone. And it was just maybe 6 months here, 3 months there.
Right.
And I taught in a little place called Potter's Fork, and there was a feud going on there between these 2 families. Woo! And it was the funniest thing. This old man was in the neighborhood, and he had 2 grandchildren. He and his wife were raising them, and they called him Carbide Mullins. And he was a huge gorilla of a man. And every day at lunchtime, he brought his children pop and cookies to eat. He'd come and stand. There was a fence around. The highway was right there, and there was an opening for the gate. And he would come and stand there by the fence post until his little girl came out and got the cookies and pop. And those children looked as if they had not been bathed since the day they were born. I tried. I just didn't know what.
And this is when you were about 19?
No, I was 20, 21. No, I had children by then. We were on recruiting duty.
Oh, really?
And the community begged me to teach.
Oh, so you taught kind of sporadically.
Yes, during the early part of my teaching. And they were at a loss for teachers. And it was in Letcher County. And so I didn't know what to do. And the doctor came around to give shots, and the nurse, and I tried to get them interested in these two children. And my school children told me, said, "Now, Mrs. Hicks, you better not have anything to do with old Carbide." Said, and they mentioned some man who was crippled. Said he called those children bastards, and said old Carbide about killed him. Said, look what, said he'd do the same to you. I said, well, why do they call him Carbide? He makes moonshine and puts carbide in it. You know what carbide is? It's a substance they put in for miners. It's
industrial.
They put a lamp of the sorts up here on their cap, and they put carbide in that, and then they put a little water in the carbide, and it gave off a gas which they burned.
Which would cause
the light. And he apparently put that in his whiskey, and he got caught, and they sent him to jail. And they said that they just would have nothing to do with him. He was dangerous. But you'd better be good to his children, his grandchildren. And so we had to take the census, and I went to Carbide's house. And they had a house up on one side of it touched the mountain, and the other side had poles.
It was like that?
Yes. And they went up a ladder to get in. And, they looked like they had never had a bath in their lives. And they had lice. They had head lice. It was just dripping off them. And I could not get the health authorities. It was political. And maybe they were afraid to go out and say, you have a lousy-headed granddaughter and grandson. Well, Homer and Phyllis, we stuck it out, and her hair hadn't been combed. Oh, Lordy. You just don't know. I can't find words to tell how awful it was. And so, Homer was such a bright little boy, and he wanted to learn, and he could do anything. Well, back then they spanked. At school, kids didn't mind, they spanked. And some of the little boys were not doing their work. And now I wasn't a spanker, I tell you. But I said, if you don't get that work handed in, I'm going to give you a spanking. And the little boy, not Homer, but another little boy in the class, and I gave him a little pat on the bottom, you know. Well, Homer was jealous. He wanted a little pat too. So he didn't do his work. And there I made a situation. So I gave Homer a little tap on his bottom too with my hand. And, he was a cute little boy. And anyway, when lunchtime came, here came Carbide out to the post with his cookies and Coke. And Phyllis went out to get it, and she was telling him something. And the biggest boy, Don Anderson, in class said, Miss Hicks, you're in for trouble. She's telling him you spanked Homer. And I thought, oh, my Lord, what will I do? What will I do? And the sun was shining real bright. And while I was trying to think, I looked, and Carbide was coming at a dead run toward my door. I thought, what will I do? What will I do? And I thought, I'll meet him at the door. And so I got to the door very quickly, and Carbide was, coming in out of the sun into the shade of the school. His eyes didn't focus very well, and he was standing there rolling his eyes like he was half wild. And he was, big man, and his hands out like this. And I said, Mr. Mullins, if you are here before he could do a thing, I was on the defensive. I said, if you're here about the spanking that I gave Homer, he needed it. And I said, and those children need other things. They need the lice out of their hair, and they need a bath, and they need something to eat besides milk and Coke. And by this time, the old man was so confused. He said, I guess you're right. And he backed off and went out. Well, the kids, they didn't know what to think. I had vested carbide. And I looked back and there stood, see, we had a room where we kept our coal. We had a pot-bellied stove, and we had one room, a little closet-like place where they put the coal in from the outside into that room. And there was an axe in there to chop kindling with. Well, here was this big boy holding that double-bitted axe in his hand. He said, "Miss Hicks, if old Carbide had touched you, I was going to cut his goddamn head off." I just about died. It scared me so bad. And, well, I tell you, I figured I hadn't heard the last of it. But the next morning, that night I dreamed of Carbide chasing me around the hillsides, believe you me. And I fully expected he'd be back. And I went to school the next morning. I sat down at my desk, and little Phyllis came up, and her face had been washed. A ring, just like that. And she was standing there just grinning at me, and one foot to the other. I said, "Phyllis, honey, do you want something?" She said, "Miss Hicks," and she was smiling from ear to ear. "Miss Hicks, my papa, he say you pretty." And I said, "Well, you tell Papa I think he's pretty too." And that was the last of it. And I had to quit teaching in that school when Frank got transferred to Rhode Island. And when the substitute or teacher came to take over, there's just a little bit of the year left. It was going to be my last day there, and she came in the room. She said, "What's going on?" Says, "It sounds like a funeral. Those children were screaming and crying. You never heard such carrying on. It was terrible."
It broke your heart, didn't it?
It did. And, here's my Bible that they gave me. And I treasure that, you don't know. And one little crippled girl I remember, that was when Elvis first became popular. And she loved him. Her name was Maybelline. And she carried a picture. She had written him a letter, and in return she'd received a picture of Elvis. And she just knew that he was going to be her man one day. And it's funny, the children in a place like that, if one is not physically able, they just take care of, they just gather around. But these two families were feuding, and they were both Andersons. And
were both kids in the school? Kids from both sides of that family in the school?
Yes, there were several from each family. And I had to let one group go 10 minutes early so they'd get home before the other ones left the school, so there wouldn't be a battle on the way home.
Oh, gee. Wow, that's amazing. You had a great life. I mean,
when I think back, I've had a lot of experiences, and I think how close I've come to death so many times. I almost died when Terry was born. If it hadn't been for sulfa and penicillin, I would have been gone a long time ago. I've outrun hurricanes. I've lived through a hurricane with my children. And this big tree outside, when it got daylight, I saw that tree. It was coming up. It was going this way, but each time it went back and forth, the roots were coming a little higher. And I got my children out between those horrible gusts of wind and got them into a neighbor's house. And we lived in a trailer park. And I had a friend that lived a few doors down. And I went to her, and she said, I'd call the police, I'd call the fire people, and no, everybody's out saving somebody. And she said, well, I've got some line, rope, big rope, and like the Navy used. And she got her children situated, and she came up to my house, and right in the middle of that horrible storm, and we could barely stand up. And when that tree would go that way, well, we got the rope around it, and then when it came that way, we immediately tied it to another tree so it couldn't go back, and kept it off my trailer. And as soon as we did that,
so 2 women did that.
Yes.
Totally on your own.
Totally on our own. And when we did that, the sun came out, the wind settled down, and it was a beautiful day. The sky was blue, the clouds were white, and then here came the fire department and cut the tree down. and a man came crawling out of his trailer somewhere. Did you all need any help? I wanted to throw something at him. I had knocked on several doors saying, please help me, and nobody would. They wouldn't get out. They weren't stupid enough to get out in that storm.
Wow. Wow. You've done a lot.
Oh, that's half of it.
I know. I mean, it's
But
amazing.
those are just the things that are coming to my mind this morning.
It's good. Well, was that good? Did you like?
Well, it wasn't bad.
Yeah.
The parents of this girl were against this one boy,
Yeah.
and he was an outlaw.
Yeah.
And she loved him, thought she did, but she walked from church with this other one. So the outlaw was lying in wait. And when it was a long way to her home, and the boy she walked from church with, he turned around to go back, and she came on. Well, this outlaw was waiting for him, and he sliced him up with a knife. And we saw him, he managed to get where, we had stopped to get, everybody stopped in to get a drink of water at somebody's house. And we were all of us young people, had stopped at this girl's house. And we heard somebody calling, help me, help me. And we looked, and this man that she'd walked with from church was staggering. And her parents ran to him, and they one got on each side and brought him and laid him face down on the porch. And his shirt was cut into ribbons, and there was a slice of meat out of his back about like that. And well, we took off for home, and we told everybody as we went along. And the neighbors went up, and they got this young man, and they put him on a sled. a sled now, a fodder sled, and hitched a horse to it. And see, a wagon, nobody had a wagon. We were poor people. We only had a fodder sled. And they took him out to the main road, and I guess they got him to the hospital somehow. And he lived. And she ran away with the outlaw, and he never married her, and she came home pregnant. And eventually she married somebody I'm quite sure she didn't feel a thing for. Oh, there was romance. And
you say your uncle got killed, or your...
My uncle got killed. He was fooling around with somebody else's wife. And he was a married man.
And he got killed.
And the man sent him word, you stay out of my territory and stay away from my wife.
He didn't.
And so nobody's going to tell him what to do. That was better than a dare. So he got on his horse and he headed for the woman. And he ran into relatives. And you know, if one man hated you, his whole family hated you. And they, I don't know how they got him off his horse, but anyway, they got him on the ground, and one of them held him down while the other one, they put he was on his back, and they put a pole across his neck, and one held him there with the pole across his neck, and the one took his feet and broke his neck and threw him in the Kentucky River. I mean the Licking River.
Really? Wow. No messing around.
Right.
And you said you had a cousin that got killed too, or something?
I had a cousin that killed a man because it was his cousin. He killed his cousin because he was fighting somebody and he needed a gun, and the boy wouldn't let him have it. And the man got killed his own cousin. And another man rode up to a woman's door, and he wanted her husband wasn't home, and he wanted to come in, and he was drunk, and she wouldn't let him, and he tried to force his way in. She killed him. And the man that first treated me with respect like I was a woman, I took him a drink of water when he was plowing out in the field, and he says, "Well, how are you today?" Oh, I felt that it was Christmas. Somebody had treated me like an adult. And he played the banjo. And he would play, I'd have to go to his house for something. Mommy'd send me on an errand. And he'd play his banjo for me. And at church one day, he had church out on the hillside where there was a cemetery. My grandparents are buried there. And he somehow got involved. Some men got into a fight over a woman, and they shot his eyes out. And
did he survive?
He lived, but how could you call it living for a man like that? And
he was a nice man.
He was a nice man, but he belonged to the Wiremans, and the Wiremans were, they were womanizers.
Boy, there's a lot of drama back in the hills.
And you know, this is the odd thing. You'd think you were the only individual within a mile,
right,
or within an acre. And now I was a kid that when I got the dishes done and Mommy was looking the other way, I grabbed my book and I took to the hills. And there was a hill right in front of there. Here was a creek, and there was what passed for a road. We used the creeks. The creeks were our roads. And our house was sitting right there. Well, I would go up here, and there was a big rock, big mossy rock up there, and I would sit there and read, or just watch squirrels and things, you know. And people would go up and down on their horses and so on, and you'd be surprised what you would, sitting there, what you would hear. People say, I saw a man beat the tar out of another one, and all I had to do was stand and watch him over the hill. And it I really learned a lot. I wouldn't take anything from my experiences.
No, I mean,
of course, I was always on the outside looking in.
you had a very full life.
Daddy never let me have anything to do with anybody. Oh, I'd have such a crush on a boy, and I'd want to walk to church with him. And there was no walking done, believe you me. Daddy said, "You're not going down there today. There's going to be a killing down there." And usually he was right. The boys would ride their horses up and back and forth. Here's the church house. They'd ride their horses and shoot and drink and so on.
Really?
They really would. Now, I tell you.
So they give them a lot more freedom for the man.
Oh, I reckon.
To carouse around, raise hell, and shoot.
And most of the men
drink and shoot.
They drank. They had a hound dog and a horse, and their drink, and somehow the mother or their wives would survive and raise the family. I had enough of my mother's brother. I despised that man. His daughter was about the same age I was. And one day we were walking in the woods, and I noticed her thin cotton dress had a big rip in it down the back. And I said, everybody called her Sis, and I said, "Sis, what happened to your dress?" She said, "Oh, what did she call him? Pop whipped me." And I said, "Whipped you?" And I pulled that apart, and her back was black and blue and purple. It was horrible. I said, "What in the world did you do for him to whip you like that?" I knew her as a kind, gentle person.
Yeah.
And she said, "Well," and he was lazy. Oh, he was a lazy, rotten drunk. And she said, "Well, we're going to hoe corn." And he was plowing, which he seldom did, and said we had to, when they hoed the corn, if there was a heel of corn that didn't have a stalk of corn in it, you put a seed in there.
Right.
And you'd have a pocket with corn in it. And you'd take out the corn and drop 2 grains or whatever in that, and then go on. And she said, "Mom didn't have, we didn't have any pockets." And Mom got a pair of pockets out of a pair of old pants and pinned them on her sister's dress. And they worked right along together, and the sister supplied the corn. And she said when he saw that I didn't have one of those myself, said he beat me. And he was a drunk. He was lazy. And Mommy.
Well, I'd say the life for
women
was very hard.
I guess I told you the story.
Yeah, it's very, very hard. I mean,
this man was going back through the hills, and he could not find a restaurant to save him. There just were no restaurants. And as he was driving up through this wild valley, he saw a man lying out here with a jug and his hound dog under a shade tree. And he stopped and said, "Mister," said, "could you tell me where I could find something to eat?" And the man said, "Well, my wife will soon be through plowing, and as soon as she comes in and puts the mules up and feed them, she'll fix you something." So the woman came in, took the the bridles off the mules, or the bits out of their mouth, and fed them, put them up, went in the house and fixed this man some dinner. So he was sitting there eating, and he looked out the window, and he saw beautiful hills, beautiful views, and he just thought he was in heaven, you know. And he said to her, said, "Boy, this is such beautiful country. I bet it's great living here." She said, "Well, mister, I tell you, it's great for men and hound dogs, but it sure is hell on women and mules."